Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on page 1278. Top of page 1278. Okay. So after explaining the difference between the world in which we live now, it's called Zman Hazeh, or Olam Hazeh, and Olam Haba. And here we're talking about Olam Haba as the future, after Mashiach comes. Not Olam Haba in interpretation that it's Gan Eden, because like he said, Hai Alma, which is Olam Hazeh, includes Gan Eden. So the difference being, the primary difference being that only La'asid Lave will we have the full Gilui, what he calls Amitis HaGilui, he calls it says like this, the just actual words. Amitis agili of the schar, amitis haschar v'hamshochas ha'etzem ha'mitzvah, the true and full revelation of what a mitzvah accomplishes. So today we don't see it only through the garments of of mitzvah, yud k in the garment of the exchange of mem tzadik, and in the Vav K as it expresses itself in this physical world. But the full of it will be La'asid Lave. And that's why Chazal say in general that Schar Mitzvah B'haya Al Maleka, that this full revelation in this world we don't have. Because everything we have, and I think when he said HaBrocha Shel HaMitzvah, I thought first he meant the Birchas HaMitzvah. He could mean HaBrocha Shel HaMitzvah, meaning the blessings that come from a mitzvah, like Imbuchu Kesei Telechu, that when you do mitzvahs, we'll be blessed. I think that's what he means. Habracha shel mitzvah begashmis, b'bchinas yuvche shebemitzvah shebechiluf asfin, with the exchange of the letters, regardless. So also now, when we do a mitzvah, we draw down energy from the highest levels as well. But we're talking about the revealed part, like we learned at length in the previous paragraph on page 1276 and 1277, that now it's still in the garment, v'nigla kvedavaya will only be la'asid lave. Now, we haven't yet discussed what exactly is the gili that we have in this world. We'll talk about that now, but I want to first sum up what we learned. And then he says the mitzvahs draw down b'chola elamis from the highest levels of Gan Eden, Elyon, of Bria, to the lowest levels in Asiya, also to the Ayin Sarim, the 70 ministers, so to speak, the divine, the heavenly ministers of the nations of the world, b'chol mishpachas ha'adama, that from there will be nimshach, and the mitzvah is mamshach that also mishpachas ha'adama. In other words, mitzvahs sustain and bring blessings to this world. And we're going to learn more details about that. B'chol shefa datzach de neiged asiyah. And every flow, these blessings are all brought into every flow in daimim tzemeach chai. Bottom line is mitzvahs saturate the whole world with godliness. And in that sense, even today, like he said, and he explained it in the context of Yichud Chitzeni and Yichud Pnimi of Abba ve'Imma and Zun. As it's known that the Yichud Chitzeni of Abba ve'Imma has to always be there, which is Amshara of Vavke, has to always sustain existence. However, it can be in a very minimal level. In a tzimtzum b'yeser, as he says. And through the performance of mitzvahs, we bring Yichud Pnimi. Even now, he's saying, Yichud Pnimi of Abba ve'Imma and Zun. And that Pnimi radiates into the Chitzenius. So, in other words, it elevates it all. And he gave the example of the Yichud Pnimi, Gabe Chitzeni, would be the difference between when a person is awake on a neshama compared to a guf. So when a person is asleep, the neshama is in a lower, so-called much lowerly, not active, or just the minimal activity, I should say, to keep the person alive. And when he's awake, there's the full vitality and all the energy that comes when the neshama is completely in full throttle, so to speak. During sleep, you don't recognize, it's not that discernible, the vitality of the person. Obviously, the person is breathing and the basic functions are going on, are happening, but it's not the full vitality. And he gave the example of a face When you look at someone's face, you see the vitality, the chayis pnimi. When you look at their back, you don't see it. Okay. Same thing, yichud chitzeni. In the yichud chitzeni is like more of an energy, there is an energy flow that sustains existence, but it could be on a minimal level. Yachalias, he says, the Yachalias, tzimtzum b'yesed. I'm reading at the bottom of page 1277. And like Kant understalig, you're like a body without a soul, or at least a minimal soul. And it's very concealed. And the yichud pnimi on top of page 1278 is b'shaz the neshama, is now a neshama to the chitzeni. In other words, it's vitalizing the outer, not just the minimal, but it's vitalizing it. It gives koyach v'oiz, power and strength, to be in a way b'chinas ribui ha'er v'ribui ha'ashpah. Like when you see a person's awake, they're at full strength, and their body is being enlivened. It's not just the neshama is that way; the body is being enlivened. And then he said in the parentheses, "Gam yesh gili aprimis." Also, nasogas haneshamas, not just in the neshama into the guf, but the neshamas also reach deeper understandings and a comprehension in Torah and the Aveda Shabalev and in Kiyam Mitzvahs. So everything is more alive when a person is awake. In this case, when there's the yichud pnimi that comes from mitzvahs. So you can live, God forbid, in a world where there's no mitzvahs, where the person is not performing mitzvahs, and the world is sustained because God is keeping it alive, but it's at its minimal level. There's an expression, interesting expression, that the Rebbe's father, we say in Geshem and in Tal, we say the expression, l'chaim v'lei l'movis. So he asks the question, if it's l'chaim, it's lei l'movis. If it's alive, life is definitely lei l'movis, not death. Why do you have to say it twice? Absence of death is life. So he says, no, you could be lei l'movis, but not be l'chaim. You could be, you're not dead, but you still could be a zombie, my own words. You're not dead, but you can't say you're fully alive. So he's saying the tefillah says, l'chaim v'lei l'movis. Not just that you should not be dead, which is the minimal of life, but you should actually be l'chaim, fully alive with full vitality. Like we say when we say l'chaim to each other. It's more than just absence of lack of life. It's much more than that. Okay, that's where we stopped. So now he's going to continue and explain how these mitzvahs today, Zman Hazeh, what they accomplish. And then, of course, b'schar mitzvah b'hayal maleka, because the etzem, the yudke, in its full revelation without any garments, will happen in the future. But he's going to now first explain what means schar mitzvahs in this world, and also Gan Eden, which is also an extension of this world, as we learned. Okay, so let's read, and then the fuller picture will now emerge. I would suggest if you have questions, wait till we finish this piece now. V'zehu, and then the third line of page 1278, the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. He says now like this, V'zehu, and this is what it says, Im b'chukei telechu. Remember, that was when he brought this, it says, Mikra mole dibra kosov, the pasuk is filled with references that when you do mitzvahs, v'nasati gishmeichem beitem, you will, the physical world will benefit from it, which was the initial question. So why do you say schar mitzvah b'hayal maleka? So we already have the answer, because schar mitzvah, we're talking about etzem schar mitzvah, amitis aschar, the true full glory of it. But that doesn't mean that you don't have any gilui. So he says like this, and this is the meaning that when you will follow, when you will follow my chukes, my laws, and I shall give gishmeichem be'itam. Literally means that the rains will fall in their time. They won't, because rain is vital to the whole survival of the people, especially in an agricultural society. And gishmeichem also b'chlal, Baal Shem Tov says, means gashmius. Essentially, it's referring to all the sustenance that we need. So you see clearly, the pasuk says, when you do mitzvahs, you follow God's laws, nesati gishmeichem be'itam. It doesn't say in the future you'll be blessed. It says right now, you nesati gishmeichem be'itam. So he says, why? What's the reasoning for it? So he's now going to explain it based on what we just said, what a mitzvah accomplishes. Remember, a mitzvah is bringing into existence the very purpose of existence. So existence exists even when you don't fulfill the purpose. but at a minimal level, like on a low burner level, just the minimum energy to keep existence in place. But until the Adam doesn't come and do mitzvahs, you're not fulfilling, you're not bringing the previous air that gives vitality to the world, not just minimal. So he says, Ta'ateva, nature, very nature of existence. And where is that rooted? The root of the nature of existence, which we said, is the structure of existence. The being, existence itself is rooted in the yichud chitzeni. Because remember, everything needs divine energy to give it sustenance. But existence itself, like we spoke about the art, not the artist's intention in it, but the art itself needs to be sustained, and that comes from the outer union of Chachma and Bina. As Chachma and Bina associate, basically how God's wisdom associates to creating the structure, to creating the art, but not the primis dika kavana in it. Harizeh, so he says, this nature, which is rooted in Yichud Chitzeni, Harizeh meshubad, la'anhoga hatera, keguf la'neshama. Very powerful, interesting expression. He says nature is bound. Meshubad means, like when you say something is bound to, means it's dependent on. It's like a servant who's completely meshubad, subjugated. The word subjugated is a good word. To the anhog of Torah. Because remember, we said Torah and Mitzvos is like a neshama leguf. The guf is existence. It gets a minimal amount of energy, like when you're asleep. But the body cannot be alive without a soul. So just like a Torah, keguf l'neshama, just like nature is bound to the Hanhogas HaTeira, like a body is bound to the soul. Because the Teira gives it its true sustenance. Because the inner Hamshacha, which means coming from the inner intention of the divine, which is, of course, Yichud Pnimi of Abba Vima, like he said on the first line. He's using those words. It gives power and strength to the outer. Just like a soul, when you're awake, gives power and strength and vitalizes and brings alive and energizes the body. So here the body is compared to the world. Torah and Mitzvos is compared to the neshama. So the performance of Torah and Mitzvos is brings alive the neshama, not just the neshama, brings alive and makes the body stronger. Because Teva and the world is dependent on Torah and Mitzvos. As we're soon going to learn more details about it. So now he continues. Okay, now that is the statement. But of course, you can ask the question, why then is it that we had a Holocaust? Why is it that we have a world where Golis, we don't always see this? You see people who do Torah Mitzvahs are actually many times Shaim Gavrim Bay, and they're actually hurt. Not only are they not being thanked for bringing blessing to the earth, they're being hurt by the earth, by the world. So he's now going to explain that there's different stages in history of this revelation that comes through mitzvahs. But in Inyan, the world is dependent on the Torah mitzvahs of an neshama in this world, as he's going to explain, because that's the whole kavanah of the world. But he says like this: Ubizman shahaya Beis Hamikdash kayam. When the Beis Hamikdash stood, the time when the Beis Hamikdash was standing. The primary hashpah of brachas was in Eretz Yisrael, u'b'mokem hamikdash, and on the Temple Mount, the place of the Beis Hamikdash. U'b'mokem hamikdash, hu shar hashamayim, because that's called the shar hashamayim, the gate from heaven, as Yaakov Avinu said when he fell asleep there, and then he realized, he said, "This is the gate to heaven." In other words, the place where the heavenly blessings enter this world is through Eretz Yisrael in general, and the Mokem HaMikdash specifically, the gate to heaven. In the time of the Beis HaMikdash. Umesham haya nimshach, and from there the brachas and the blessings were nimshach, transmitted or nimshach were extended. B'bchinas hachitzenius, also to the outer dimension, la'ayin sorim hasevavim b'chutz la'aretz, to the 70 ministers, the 70 nations that are ruled by that are governed by their 70 ministers, that hasevavim, that surround, that are outside of Eretz Yisrael. So notice the bracha came down in the time of the Beis Hamikdash through Israel, through Eretz Yisrael, through the Beis Hamikdash, through the Mikdash, and from there it extended and traveled outside, also to the outer dimensions of the world, which is calling chutz la'aretz, chutz, outside of Eretz Yisrael, to the Ayin Sarim, like he says, that surrounded, that lived around it. Ukiyadua be'inyan har karbonis. In the parentheses, referring, the Midrashim speak about this, that when the Jews brought offerings in the Beis HaMikdash, it wasn't just for themselves, it was also for the entire world. Like we say, the 70 cows, the 70 animals, the 70 porim that were brought on Sukkot, Keneged Shivim Sorim. They correspond to the 70 umes, to the 70 nations. So we see that the karbonis that were brought in the Beis HaMikdash brought blessings to everybody. But the order in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, it went Eretz Yisrael, Bokem HaMikdash to the rest of the world. Begam Achshav, and also now, B'yesh Yisrael B'golas B'chutz La'aretz. That's the time of the Beis HaMikdash. What about now? When the Jews are in Golas, they're displaced in exile. B'chutz La'aretz, they're no longer all in Eretz Yisrael, they're also outside B'chutz La'aretz, outside of Eretz Yisrael. So still, Iker Maimed Matzav Hashefa Halakus L'Tzedek Ha'Elemis. The main Maimed Matzav, another interesting expression, the main status, the main state of being of the flow, the divine flow, in order to sustain existence, L'Tzedek Ha'Elemis, for the need for the worlds, Tolei, where does it come from? That Chayes? Tolei Rak B'Mitzvos She'Yisrael Eisen B'Gashmi Dafka. Is dependent only in the mitzvahs that the Jews physically, the Yisrael physically perform in physical world dafka. Even though they're spread and dispersed between the nations of the world. That's what the Chazal Staka Asa Kodesh Baruch Hu Yisrael Shapizim Bein Umes. So the question is, why is it staka? What kind of staka is that God dispersed the Jews? So he says, because that's the way they're mevared and tzutzes through the mitzvahs everywhere. But that's just an aside. He's just using the word pizra and ben umis. In other words, in Eretz Yisrael, during the Beis HaMikdash, when the mitzvah was clear, even in Golas, when the Jews are everywhere dispersed among the nations, they too, they says the ikar ma'im and the matzav hashefel lekis for the worlds is also dependent on the mitzvahs that the Jews do in a physical form. Amar, like the Chazal say, the kashem she'yefshel le'elam b'rei ruches, just like the world cannot exist without winds. Ruches means winds. It also means sides, like the ruach means the different sides, mizrach, ma'ariv, tzaf, and darim. But I think here he means ruches without winds. Kach yefshel le'elam b'rei Yisrael. So too, the world cannot exist without the Jewish people, without Yisrael. Why? Because of this reason, because their mitzvahs creates the sustenance of existence, the primary sustenance. Hare. So he says from this, so what do we take out from this? Hare, the gam kiyama elam, that also the preservation and the sustenance of the world, like we said, that comes from the yichud chitzeni, efshar b'lei Yisrael. It cannot be without the people of Israel in the Bekim through the performance of Torah and Mitzvos of theirs, that they draw from the level of Pnimius. Now, immediately you can ask the question, 1 second, didn't you say earlier that without Mitzvos we do have a minimal energy? And now you're saying that even Kiyama Elam is also. So he may explain it, but the obvious answer is very straightforward. Even when you're asleep, if you have no soul altogether, a person, God forbid, is not alive. It's just during sleep, you also need an neshama. It's just then there, everything is on a minimal level. So it could be that he's saying here that even if Jews don't do, even there's no Torah and Mitzvahs, there is the concept of Torah and Mitzvahs. And like he's going to say in a moment, if there was no Torah and Mitzvahs existing, the world couldn't exist. It needs that neshama. Obviously, when they do Torah and Mitzvahs, then it reveals it like when we're awake in full glory. It looks like that's what he's suggesting here, but I'm not positive. I'm just qualifying because now that he's saying that what mitzvahs do. But let's read on, and I'm sure it'll become clear. Like he says, umafurish Amru, and this is explicitly stated. Again, Chazal state, Tanai hitna HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'maaseh bereishis. God made a condition with maaseh bereishis. He created it conditionally. Im yekaimu Yisrael teirasi mutav. If the Jewish people will perform and they'll keep my Torah, great. And if not, I will destroy the world. That's why it says b'yem hashishi. What's hashishi, says the Gemara? Because even though God created the world, the Matan Torah didn't happen for 26 generations, but the Eibishter made a Tanai in the beginning of creation, 26 generations earlier. He says, I'm creating you, the world, on condition that the Eden will accept Torah and they'll keep the Torah. So there's the Lashon, the Pasuk says, Eretz Yara v'Shakota. The earth was trembling, and then the tremble stopped, v'Shakota, then it was calmed. Why? Because when Matan Torah came, the world was trembling. Are they going to fulfill the condition? Because if the world knows that if the Jews don't receive the Torah and don't keep the Torah, its whole existence is in question. So that's why it says Eretz Yara. First the earth trembled. And then when they received the Torah, Shakota, the earth calmed down because the condition was fulfilled. So you see here that even before Torah and Mitzvahs, the world is dependent on condition on Torah. That if you don't fulfill my covenant, the very Shemayim v'Aretz will not be able to exist. Lefi shebe mitzvahs di Yisrael, because in the mitzvahs that the Jewish people do, Tolei b'chinas ribei ha'or is dependent. Now he's saying the ribei ha'or, not just the existence. Okay, is dependent the abundance of energy. Hanesef b'ribei gadol ba'atzmus ein sof. The abundant energy that's additional to the minimal energy, the ribei gadol with great abundance, with great increased level, ba'atzmus ein sof, because mitzvahs reach all the way to atzmus ein sof, which is the purpose of where the purpose of existence is first established. Liyes yismach Hashem gam b'maisav, that it should be a state that the Eibishter should have joy also from his actions, from his creations. Lashpia lehem shalei lefi ma'aseihem. So even if to transmit to them blessings, shalei lefi ma'aseihem, which means even if they themselves are not, I'm not sure what he means here. Does he mean ma'asav, maybe the rest of the world? Even if the world is not worthy, but because they're doing Torah and Mitzvahs, the Eden, the Eibush is mashpia chayis, even to those, even if it's not completely commensurate to their actions. I think that's what he's saying here. But let me read the parentheses and continue. I want to finish the piece because I'm sure some of the things that are still not clear will become clear as we read. So let's all be patient here. So he continues, V'hainu, mipnei, and the reason for this is, mipnei, V'hainu, this means, mipnei shetachlis hakavon hapnimis, because the ultimate purpose, tachlis hakavona, the inner ultimate purpose, b'yisavas ha'elamus, in the creation and the bringing into being of the worlds, hu sheyeh teisvus er v'gili be'elam. It's not just that the world should exist, but that the world should have this taste for air, this additional energy and revelation in the world. Now I understand what he's saying. And without this internal inner intention and kavona, yeah, there wouldn't have been even the chitzenius. So even though it's true, the world can exist purely on a minimal level, but based on the Chazal we just learned, that's only on condition that the Jews will keep the Torah mitzvahs. In other words, I'll give you some minimal chitzenius because there's a condition. So because of Torah mitzvahs, which is the kavona primis, therefore, the whole reason the chitzenius exists. It's not like, oh, you know what? If you don't have Torah mitzvahs, you can keep your chitzenius. No, there is no chitzenius without primis. However, you could have a minimal until the primis comes and vitalizes and all of that. In other words, it's like you're not created to sleep. You're created to be alive, and awake and do what you have to do. But because of that, I will allow to give you the energy even when you're asleep, the minimal energy. Yeah. And this is the statement, the benim nimlach. Who did God consult when he created existence? Before he created existence. We learned this in volume 2 at length. He consulted with the neshamas of tzaddikim. He explained there that it doesn't mean that there were no tzaddikim yet. There wasn't creation yet. But it meant God envisioned the tzaddikim that will do Torah and Mitzvos and basically consulted with them, meaning not a consultation like he spoke with them, but he consulted, in other words, he considered their Torah and Mitzvos, and that is what gave him the reason to create. It's dafka because of that the Tzimtzum Arishin happened. So even though the Tzimtzum Arishin is a concealment, but there's a reason there was a Tzimtzum Arishin, in order to create existence, in order to be able to bring the Teisvus Eir, the energy of through Torah and Mitzvahs into existence. It wasn't like God created the world, and then as an afterthought, he said, okay, now I'll send you Torah and Mitzvahs. No, it all started with Torah and Mitzvahs. It all started that the Kavanah was, the Eibishter wanted a dira b'tachtenim, that in this tachtenim you should perform Torah and Mitzvahs and reveal my presence there. In tachtenim take. And that's why he created tachtenim. That's why he created a chitzenius. And the whole chitzenius is dependent now, both its very existence and obviously on the fact, in other words, its very existence is dependent. I'm building the house, even on a minimal level, because I know in this house will come a human being who will do Torah and Mitzvahs there. If not, I wouldn't have built the house in the first place. So the chitzenius is also dependent on the pnimius. So therefore, the transmission of the chitzenius, the creation of the chitzenius, the creation of the art is in order to reveal the deeper kavanah of the artist. It's not just the art as an end in itself. It's true, from the art you can figure out some things, but the kavanah is the kavanah pnimius, like he says, amshachas apnimius. The yesh lemer. Now he's going to refer back to something he said at the bottom of page 1248. 1248, if you look there, before we read, I want to just sum up what we learned back then. He said, Meichen de Gadlus, or Yichud Pnimi of Avah, where they both together face and gaze at Arech Hanatik, the Yichud Pnimi, the Zivuk Shalim, or Zivuk Shlim, the complete union that brings an Er Chodosh. He said that comes through Avodah. If you look, that's the Avodah. Whereas Chitzenius HaMeichin, he says originally, is just the minimal that God gives in order to give creation. But then he adds, if you look at 4 lines from the bottom of page 1248, he says, this yichud happens alone, not through our Avodah. Then he says, he says you still need Avodah to draw the Gili. So there it appears, Pshat, that you don't need Avodah for the Yichud Chitzeni. But he does say you need Avodah to bring it the Gili. So he's now referring back to that. That was also cited, by the way, on page, I recall correctly, at the end of the paragraph on page 1255, he also cited it. So he says now like this, V'yesh lemer, I'm back on page 1278. V'yesh lemer, you could say, Shezeu hakavana b'Pri Etz Chaim shehuva le'il. That's the intention of the Pri Etz Chaim that was cited earlier. The lahamshech hagili d'bchinas yichud chitzeni da'avah hugam ken al yedei Avodah. That even though the yichud chitzeni itself is not directly due to Avodah, but to draw the gili of it, it's also through Avodah that we, as I just read at the bottom of page 1248. V'oz b'chinas hachitzeni su b'chinas ribui hashefa gam b'yesem mekafi amida. So because the whole condition of the Yichud Chitzeni is because of Avodah, so therefore to draw down in a revealed way is also through Avodah, and then you get something even more because through Torah and Mitzvos, through Avodah, you also have Ribuy HaShefa, not just the minimal, but also b'yeser kafi amida, more than the measure that was given it to initially. So both the minimal energy is dependent on the fact that that Jews will do Torah and Mitzvos, and of course the kavanah is not that it should remain minimal. The kavanah is it should become maximum energy through Torah and Mitzvos. That's what he just added now in the parentheses. Valkain. So let me go continue until I'm finished, and then, as I said, I'll take questions. Valkain, and therefore, it's not possible for the world to be at all without the performance of mitzvahs of Yisrael. Imrav ima'at, whether it's more mitzvahs or less, or maybe more energy or less energy. Rav ima'at can go on the kiyum mitzvahs or on the existence of those. I think it's going on Torah mitzvahs. But bottom line, you have to have mitzvahs, even if it's a smaller amount, but you need them. Kedei kiyum ha'elam, not kedei kiyum. Yalken iyaf shleil b'chlal b'kiyum ha'mitzvahs Yisrael imrav ma'at kedei kiyum ha'elam esaruchim b'agash. In order to preserve, to sustain the worlds, the spiritual worlds and the physical worlds. It could be Rava Ma'at means the different levels of energy in the physical, in the spiritual and physical worlds, as I just said. You could read it both ways. But bottom line is that you can't have existence is dependent on the mitzvahs, the kiyum mitzvahs of Yisrael. And this is even in Zman HaGolus, when the Jews are dispersed and exiled and displaced among the nations of the world, like he said earlier. V'hainu, let's continue. V'hainu, and this means the kasher achsher dara b'kiyum mitzvahs beribui. That when the generation is worthy, achsher means achshara means that it's worthy. It's a worthy generation because you have also achsher dara bitniya, a generation that's not worthy. But when it's achsher dara b'kiyum mitzvahs beribui ukedeboi. When the generation is a worthy generation in the performance of mitzvahs beribui, meaning abundantly, and kedaboy lemeheva means completely, like it's kamos and echus maybe. Abundant means many mitzvahs, and kedaboy lemeheva means they're done properly. Oz hasimcha al yena sheyismach Hashem b'maisav. Then the simcha above, the supernal joy that the Eibishter rejoices b'maisav in his actions, meaning in his creation. Then the outer chitzenis de hashpa, which is b'nasati geshmeichem be'itam, is beribui hashpa. It's then an abundant state. Now I understand what he meant earlier. Remember I said, what did he mean? Just a second. I want to just go back to before. Yeah. Okay. Oh, the Simcha Yena. I just one second. Where was the Yismach Hashem, the Maisav? Oh, Yismach Hashem Gamais Labashpilem Shalelefi Maisehem. I think now he's going to go back. So when it's Achsher Dora, so then when there's abundant mitzvahs and being done properly, the flow is basically the channels are opened, and the flow is in abundance. The imu b'miut, so Rava Ma'at is going on Torah mitzvahs, not on the flow. It's also affecting the flow. Imu b'miut, if the mitzvahs are on a more diminished level, B'kol mokim hi hasimcha yena. Nevertheless, it still creates some simcha above. Liyas hashpa chitzenis v'lo yufsak. So it won't be in abundance, but there'll still be the hashpa chitzenis because there are some mitzvahs, and v'lo yufsak, and it will not suspend, it will not stop, it will not pause, God forbid, not cease. That's the word, not cease. And continuing on after the present, but tzorich. And it's necessary that the flow, the mitzvahs are necessary that the flow should never stop, because you never can. It should always be flowing and not be diminished, because you must have energy to keep existence in place. And it's the mitzvahs that do that. So abundance, the level of how much energy flows, that depends on achshar dara, how worthy the generation is, how people are, how much mitzvahs they're performing in the best possible way. But no matter what, even on a minimal level, is dependent on the mitzvahs. V'zeu kol inyan hashinuyim. Let's finish the paragraph, the parentheses. And this is kol inyan hashinuyim tamid b'chol Rosh Hashanah v'Rosh Hashanah. This explains all the different changes, the constant changes. Every Rosh Hashanah, what happens Rosh Hashanah? Shadinu mishpat wa klal se'ela. So the fact of the matter is, why they have to be judged every year? If God has sent energy to the world, that's it. He's sustaining the world. No, because every Rosh Hashanah needs to be measured anew. Shadina mishpetu al kol ha'elam. The judgment is on not just on individuals, it's on the whole world. Like we say in the Shefris, we say al medinas b'ya Omar. We say in Musaf of Rosh Hashanah that in this day is designated the destiny of nations. Al medinas b'ya Omar. On the nations of the world. Medinas are the countries of the world. So we see that Rosh Hashanah, every Rosh Hashanah, there's shinuyim, because every Rosh Hashanah determines what kind of flow of energy will flow into the world. And not just judgment for the worlds below, but also the worlds above. And the supernal celestial bodies, the tzva maila, the army above, meaning the angels and all the tzva maila, everything, the celestial bodies. That he remembers and he judges al tzva morim on the celestial, in the army in heaven, morim above, the army above. Ba'kol toli, and it's all dependent on neshamas Yisrael. It's all dependent on neshamas Yisrael, how they will behave. Like I mentioned yesterday, the sixth day of creation, the whole creation is dependent on Zeh Tchilas Masecha. Today is the beginning of creation. Why do you say that when Adam was created? Because the whole world is dependent on Adam. So you don't just say the world is today is the beginning of creation on day one. You say it in Rosh Hashanah. That's the Yom Tchilas Masecha. Kichek Yisrael, who apparently is teaching, because the Chek, the Yisrael, who that the so-called the order or the Chek, the rules, are established all in order and in honor of Yisrael and their performance of Torah and Mitzvos. So all this came to explain the idea why mitzvahs, which reach into the Pnimius and Atzmus, sustain existence and fulfill its purpose of elevating existence and bringing more energy into it, is in sum what we just learned. However, he hasn't yet explained about revelation and concealment. That's going to be the next paragraph. He's going to say, Omnam Achshav, all this bracha is melubash in levushim, in that tzimtzum of mem tzadik of mitzvah. It's not the Yud Kei Begoli completely, as we're going to learn on. But I'm going to stop here and stop if you want to ask any questions.
I have a question.
Again, I just want to repeat. So we're going to get back. We still have to continue. What happens to this Gilui? And is it revealed, not revealed, and how revealed it is? And in contrast to Elam Haba, La'asid Lave, where it'll be the Yud Kei will come in full Gili, the full revelation of this Etzem and Shedish Shemokid of mitzvahs. Okay, go ahead.
So my question is, it makes sense that the Kiyam Torah mitzvahs would be Mechaya, would vitalize the world and bring greater energy. It is a very strong argument he makes here that in order to sustain the world, even the bare minute, the threshold of preservation of the world depends on the performance of Torah mitzvahs by Neshamas Yisrael. And I'm learning Samech Vav now, the beginning, and he says over there that because of the Karisa Bris of the Keshet, after the flood, and that the Eibishter made a promise, he's going to sustain the world forever. He's not going to destroy the world. And so I'm a little seems a little in contrast here.
In many Maimarim, it answers the question, but that Christus Bris is also dependent, because it can't be a contradiction where he says here that he would have destroyed the world if the Jews didn't receive Torah and Mitzvahs. It's a question really not on Samach Vav. It's two Maimar Chazal. One says that he made a Christus Bris that he would not destroy the world after the Mabul, and one says he would destroy the world if they didn't receive Torah and Mitzvahs. So the answer is that Christus Bris was dependent also on the Torah and Mitzvahs.
Okay, thank you.
It's a,
Meaning in anticipation of it, because Torah
just like creation
had been given. Yeah. It's this foundational principle of the creation of the world. It even precedes that, is what you're saying.
Yeah, correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So in reality, what the Rabbi is saying here is that even in the Zman Agalus, before we have Gula, Lasi Lavo, we still bring down Tosefes or according to our level of Torah and Mitzvah.
And the next paragraph, he's going to start discussing about whether it's revealed or concealed and stuff like that. Yeah.
When he speaks about Tosefes or, it seems like that means you're bringing down additional war, but it's the same kind of war, just more of it. Whereas I'm wondering if it's in Echos, it's also a different or, not just the or that's necessary to sustain Huma Olam, but it's a different or Lagamri, or is it just Tosefes of that or that's required to sustain the world?
The answer is both. It's an oil that is commensurate to the world, like the ovis that they drew the energy of Mamala Kalalman, and then there's also new energy, which Matan Torah also drew new unprecedented energy. So it's both. We learned that in volume 1. He spoke about that. But I would wait till we finish the subject because he's not finished yet. What's the difference between Olam Haba and Olam Hazeh? Because we still say Schar Mitzvah B'Hai Al Maleka, that the reward for mitzvahs is not in this world. So what Schar Mitzvah is that? Like we said, the Etzem. So we're going to learn. The next paragraph, he's going to talk about that. And also, I want to answer the big question. The fact of the matter is, what he said now is a fact that the world will not exist with Torah and Mitzvahs. But we see that the Jews have suffered greatly in Golus. So where's all why doesn't the world recognize that? If we're sustaining the world, how could we be so hurt by the world? So he hasn't asked that question directly here, but we'll address that too.
Okay, one more quick question. One, the Rebbe didn't deal with it here, but when it says the impulsive side, if you will bring down, is there a specific reason why the term is chok rather than say mishpatim or edus? Is there any discussion of that, or is that irrelevant?
The end of the pasuk is Kichek Yisrael hu mishpat lelekei Yaakov. The full verse is Kichek Yisrael hu mishpat lelekei Yaakov. So he mentions chok and mishpat. There's discussion in other Maimarim. I don't know if it's relevant here. In other Maimarim, definitely talks about why it uses chok, why it uses mishpat. Here you could say, you could speculate a lot of things. It doesn't say enough. You could im b'chukosei telechu is also b'chukosei chok. It could be chok liyisrael, as in that it's dependent on the laws of Israel. I'm not sure. Other Maimarim definitely talk about why it says chok liyisrael and mishpat lelekei Yaakov. By Yisrael it says chok, and by Yaakov it says mishpat. Okay. Good.